Emmanuel opened his eyes. He was no longer inside the workers' room. He stood in the middle of a magnificent modern mansion. Everything around him reflected wealth. The workers' clothes were gone. He now wore an expensive black suit. Diamond rings rested on his fingers. Gold bracelets circled his waist. A heavy gold chain hung around his neck. Emmanuel looked at himself in disbelief. He cautiously walked through the mansion. Then he noticed a single old wooden door. It doesn't belong there. Curiosity slowly drew him towards it. He reached for the handle. The door cracked open. There was no room behind it, only a thick forest. A cold wind rushed through the hallway. Emmanuel's heart quickened. Immediately, he turned around. His face went pale. The mansion was gone. There was nothing behind him anymore, only the endless forest. Fear immediately took over. His eyes dropped to the golden ring. It has to be this. Without thinking, he pulled the ring from his finger. Emmanuel slowly walked deeper into the forest. After what felt like forever, an ancient stone altar appeared before him. Burning candles surrounded it. Dark statues stood silently around the altar. Beside it stood a woman with enormous wings. She watched him without moving. Emmanuel froze. "What are you?" The woman calmly looked at his empty hand. A faint smile appeared on her face. "You broke the rule. Once upon a time, a luxurious and incredibly wealthy family is looking for 4 people to manage and maintain their isolated mansion for just 1 month. The work sounds simple, but the payment is unlike anything anyone had ever imagined. At the end of the contract, each worker will receive $100,000. Nobody can understand why anyone would pay that kind of money for such ordinary work. Some people call it the opportunity of a lifetime. Others believe it has to be a catch. But one thing is certain, the family has one strict rule. They never employ people who are related by blood. No one knows why. That is how the opportunity found Emmanuel, a young man in his early 20s. Emmanuel is the youngest of 4 brothers. His elder brothers are David, Tunde, and Sheung. Life have never been difficult for them, but it has never been good as they hope. They have enough to survive, but not enough to build the future they dream of. Like many Nigerians, they believed that one opportunity can change everything. The moment Emmanuel tells his brothers about the job, they realize there is one problem. Since the family refused to employ relatives, the only way all the 4 of them can get the job is to pretend they all come from different families. The offer is too good to ignore, so they agree to keep their relationship a secret, believing nothing is more than harmless lie. That night, the 4 brothers arrived separately beneath a bridge in Lagos, just as they planned. They pretended they have never met before. Rain falls steadily, soaking the empty road beneath the bridge. The sound of passing cars echoed in the distance. No one speaks. No one looks at one another. Each of them quietly wondered if they have come to the right place. The longer they wait, the more the silence began to feel unsettling. Then, a loud horn suddenly cut through the rain. A large black bus suddenly emerged from the darkness and stopped right in front of them. The door slid open. The 2 men stepped out. Without introducing themselves, they handed each worker a black cloth. "Cover your eyes." For a brief moment, they hesitated, but $100,000 is enough to silence every doubt. One after another, they pulled the cloth over their faces and they are led into the bus. The doors shut behind them. Within seconds, the bus disappeared into the raining night, taking them to a destination none of them can see. Inside the bus, complete silence filled the air. The black cloth remained tightly wrapped around their faces, leaving them with nothing but the sound of the engine. The journey seemed endless. Gradually, the smooth city road gives way to a rough, lonely path. The bus began to bounce from one side to another. Outside, the rain grows heavier. Thunder crashes across the dark sky, shaking the windows. With every passing minute, the road feels more isolated. An uneasy silence settled over them, and for the first time, each of them begins to wonder if they have just made the biggest mistakes of their lives. After what felt like hours, the bus finally came to a stop. The doors swung open. One by one, the workers were led outside. Only then were they told to remove the black cloth covering their eyes. The moment the blindfold came off, the 4 men stood speechless. Before them stood a magnificent mansion. It was unlike the modern luxury home they were used to seeing. Its design belonged to another era. It looked like the kind of estate an old billionaire had built generations ago. A mansion that has stood the test of time without losing an ounce of its grandeur. Every wall seemed to carried the weight of a long and powerful history. The mansion was breathtaking, yet despite its beauty, a strange feeling lingered in the air. The place felt far too quiet, as though the house had been waiting for them all along. The front door slowly opened. One by one, the 4 workers stepped inside. The mansion looked even more impressive from within. Everything was neat, everything was silent. They were led into a large dining hall. Seated at the table was the Eresin family. Mr. Eresin sat at the head of the table. Beside him was Mrs. Eresin. Across them sat their 12-year-old daughter, Grace, quietly eating a meal. The house manager who had brought the workers stepped forward and placed 4 fowls on the table. These are all the new workers, sir. Mr. Eresin glanced through the files before closing them. You will be staying here for 1 month. If you do your work and obey every rule, you will receive every dollar we promised. But if you break even 1 rule, you will leave this house immediately. He paused, then he looked at each of them. And remember this, you must never speak to my daughter. Grace does not even look up. She simply continued eating as though she does not even add a word. For a brief moment, Emmanuel looked at Mrs. Erenson. There was sadness in her eyes, but she said nothing. Mr. Erenson nodded towards the house manager, showed them their rooms. The house manager picked up their bags and led them upstairs. As Emmanuel walked along the hallway, his eyes returned to a large family portrait hanging on the wall. Something about it made him slow down. Before he could take a closer look, the house manager called his name and he quietly walked away. Each of the 4 workers had been taken to a different room. The rooms was nothing like they had expected. Everything was spotless. The furniture was elegant. It felt more like a luxury guest room than a place meant for workers. After the house manager left, Emmanuel placed his bag on the bed and began unpacking. As he turned around, something caught his attention. A large family portrait hung on the wall. He stepped closer. It was the same portrait he had seen downstairs. For a reason he couldn't explain, he couldn't stop looking at it. A strange feeling settled inside him. It felt as though he had seen the portrait before, but that was impossible. He had never met the Erenson family until today. Without warning, there was a soft knock. Before Emmanuel could respond, the door opened slightly. David slipped inside and quietly closed it behind him. He first looked towards the hallway, then back at Emmanuel. Listen very carefully, he whispered. If you are going to leave this place with our money, don't call me your brother again. From today, we are just 4 workers. He paused. I don't know what is going on in this house, but when people make a rule and refuse to explain it, I don't test it. So stay away from that girl. He gave Emmanuel a firm pat on the shoulder. 30 days. We do our job, collect our money, and leave. Without waiting for a reply, David quietly stepped out and closed the door behind him. The room felt silent again. Emmanuel slowly turned back to the portrait. For some reason, he couldn't take his eyes off it. The next morning, the mansion came alive. Each of the 4 workers quietly went about their duties assigned to them. David was assigned to clean Mrs. Erenson's room. He knocked gently. After hearing a soft come in, he stepped inside. The room was quiet. Everything was perfectly arranged. As David dusted a writing desk, he carefully lifted a stack of children's drawings so he could clean beneath them. His eyes paused. Every drawing was different, but Grace appeared in every single one, always smiling and alone. David quietly placed the drawings back where he found them. So he reached for a framed photograph beside them so he could wipe the dust underneath. Just as he lifted it, his heart skipped a beat. For the briefest moment, the woman in the photograph looked strikingly familiar. It looked like his late mother. David immediately brought the frame a little closer. Before he could get a proper look, Mrs. Erenson calmly took the frame from his hands before he could look any closer. She turned its face down and placed it back on the table. Leave that, she said softly. David blinked. I'm sorry, ma. Mrs. Erenson said nothing. She simply rested a hand on the frame for a moment before walking towards the window. David finished cleaning the room in silence, but as he stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind him, one question refused to leave his mind. Had he really just seen his dead mother's face, or as his eyes deceived him? That evening, the 4 workers were invited to have dinner with the Erenson family. The dinner table had already been prepared. Mr. Erenson sat at the head of the table. Mrs. Erenson sat quietly beside him. Grace ate in silence, never looking up. The 4 workers took their seat. For a while, no one spoke. Only the sound of cutlery echoed through the dining hall. Then Mr. Erenson looked at Emmanuel. I noticed you couldn't stop looking at the family portrait. Emmanuel nodded politely. Yes, sir. Something about it caught my attention. Mr. Aronson turned his eyes toward the portrait on the wall. That woman in that portrait was my mother. The little boy beside her was me. He remained silent for a long moment. My mother wanted something that wasn't meant to be ours. So one night, I mixed the poison myself. I watched her drink it. The room fell completely silent. Mr. Aronson calmly continued eating. I never regretted what I did. Every word Mr. Aronson spoke struck something buried deep inside David. His breathing grew heavier. His grip tightened around the spoon in his hand. David lowered his eyes to his plate, but he couldn't hear any other word Mr. Aronson was saying. The only thing echoing in his mind was, I mixed the poison myself. He fought to keep his face calm, but his trembling hands betrayed him. The others stared at Mr. Aronson in stunned silence, unsure whether they had heard him correctly. Mrs. Aronson was the first to speak. Is everything alright, David? David forced himself to look up. Yes, ma, I am fine. Grace slowly lifted her head. For the first time, a faint smile appeared on her face. David lowered his eyes to his plate, but beside him, something already began to unravel. Later that night, the four brothers quietly gathered inside an unused storage room. It was only the place in the mansion they had believed no one would hear them. For a brief moment, no one spoke. David finally broke the silence. Mr. Aronson, that man is not normal. The others looked at him. David lowered his voice. I can't explain it, but something about him does not feel right. Today let out a quiet scoff. We have been here for 5 days. No one has threatened us. No one had harmed us. I think you are just letting your mind play tricks on you. Emmanuel hesitated before speaking. I don't know. I feel it too. Before he could continue, Sean cut him off. Emmanuel, enough. What exactly do you feel? You've barely lived long enough to know the difference between fear and imagination. We come here because we wanted a better life. So stop looking for ghosts where there hasn't any. Emmanuel immediately fell silent. The room became quiet again. Then Tunde leaned forward. I have been thinking. The others immediately moved closer. While I was cleaning the west angle this morning, I saw a small bronze statue. I don't know how much about antiques, but I know that piece alone is worth more than everything we own. He looked at each of them. The Aronson family has an entire mansion filled with things like that. If one or two disappear, I doubt anyone will notice. The house manager only comes when he brings new workers. The rest of the time, it's just Mr. Aronson, his wife, and Grace. A slow smile appeared on Sean's face. So we live here with more than the $100,000? Tunde nodded. Exactly. Emmanuel stared at them. But $100,000 each is already enough. The money brought us here. Greed shouldn't keep us here. There was complete silence. 3 pairs of eyes slowly turned towards him. The look on their faces told Emmanuel he shouldn't have said any other word. David remained quiet. He wasn't thinking about the statue or money. His mind was already trapped at the dinner table, hearing Mr. Aronson's calm voice over and over again. I mixed the poison myself. Tunde looked around one last time. Tonight, we take the first item. No one answered. The silence inside the room suddenly felt heavier than before. Later that afternoon, Emmanuel stood alone in the kitchen, arranging a few supplies on the shelf. The mansion was unusually quiet. Without a warning, someone spoke behind him. Hi. Emmanuel turned. It was Grace. For a brief moment, he almost answered. Then he remembered Mr. Aronson's warning. He lowered his head and continued his work. Grace smiled. You shouldn't do that. Emmanuel's hand stopped moving. Slowly, he turned to her. Do what? Grace walked further into the kitchen. The thing you and the other workers talked about last night. Emmanuel felt his heart skipped a beat. He quickly looked towards the kitchen door. No one was there. I don't know what you're talking about. Grace gave a small laugh. Really? You want to steal from this house? Emmanuel's face went pale. How do you know that? Grace did not answer immediately. Instead, she picked up an apple from the counter and slowly turned it in her hand. Don't be surprised. Men are naturally greedy. They came here because of money, but after a few days, they always want more. She looked up at Emmanuel. It has happened before. Some got exactly what they wanted. A brief silence followed, and some lost everything. Emmanuel couldn't take his eyes off her. She sounded less like a 12-year-old girl, and more like someone who had watched it happen over and over again. Grace placed the apple back on the counter and began walking towards the door. Just before stepping out, she stopped. Without turning around, she spoke. What if I tell you, there is something in this house worth far more than money? Emmanuel stared at her. What do you mean? Grace finally looked back. A faint smile crossed her face. I know the real secret behind my family's wealth. She paused. And I can show you, if you are willing to pay the price. She walked away. Emmanuel remained where he was, unable to move. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, the $100,000 no longer felt like the biggest temptation inside that house. Later that night, the four brothers gathered again in their unusual hiding place. The moment Emmanuel walked in, David noticed something was wrong. "You don't look alright." Emmanuel hesitated, then he spoke. "I met Grace." The room fell silent. David frowned. "You spoke to her?" Emmanuel quickly shook his head. "No, she came to me. And somehow, she knew." Tunde folded his arms. "Knew what?" Emmanuel looked down. "She knew we wanted more than the money. She said people always come here satisfied, but after a few days, greed changed them." None of the brothers spoke. Emmanuel took a deep breath. "I don't think we should steal anything from this house. I feel like we are making a mistake." James coughed. "So we are taking advice from a 12-year-old girl now. She is trying to scare you, and it's working." Tunde nodded in agreement. "Exactly. We finally have the chance to change our lives, and now you want us to throw it away because of a little girl." Emmanuel slowly shook his head. "It's not just about Grace. Everything about this house feels wrong." David remained quiet. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor. He did not interrupt nor disagree. His silence said enough. Tunde noticed. "So you are taking his side too?" David finally looked up. "I am saying we should be careful." Tunde let out a bitter laugh. "Careful? We don't come here to be careful. We came here to make money." In a quiet moment, he grabbed Emmanuel by the front of his shirt. "If you ruin this opportunity for us," his voice dropped to a whisper, "I will kill you." Emmanuel froze. Tears filled his eyes. Tunde slowly released him. Then he looked at Sheil and Tunde. After a long silence, he lowered his head. "I will find out what he meant." A faint smile appeared on Tunde's face. "Good." Tunde smiled. David didn't. He simply watched his younger brother, knowing there was no turning back now. The following afternoon, Emmanuel quietly returned to the kitchen. He had barely finished arranging the shelves when Grace walked in. This time, she closed the door behind her. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Grace broke the silence. "So, have you made your decision?" Emmanuel nodded slowly. "I will hear what you have to say." A faint smile appeared on Grace's face. She reached into the pocket of her dress and carefully brought out an old golden ring. It looked ordinary, yet she handled it as though it was the most valuable thing in the house. She gently placed it on the table. Every fortune in this house began with this ring. Emmanuel stared at it. "A ring?" Grace nodded. "There are 4 of you, so each of you will wear it. 1 person each day, from the oldest to the youngest. When the 4th day is over, your reward will begin." Emmanuel frowned. "How am I supposed to convince the others? We are strangers. They don't even know who I am. How will I convince them to know their age?" Grace looked at him calmly. "That is your problem. If they truly want more, they will listen." Emmanuel couldn't take his eyes off the ring. Then he looked at Grace. "Why are you helping me?" Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. "Because you are different. The others see opportunity. You see consequences. And people like you rarely come here." Emmanuel was about to speak again, but Grace gently raised a hand, stopping him. "But everything comes with a price." Her expression suddenly becomes serious. "There is one rule. Once the ring is in your finger, no matter what you see, no matter what you hear, don't remove it before sunrise." Emmanuel swallowed. "What will I see?" Grace slowly shook her head. "No one sees the same thing." Grace's smile disappeared. She picked up the ring and placed it in Emmanuel's hands. Grace walked towards the door. She stopped without looking back. "The choice is yours now." And a brief silence followed. "You have 4 days. After that, this house will make the choice for you." She opened the door and quietly walked away. Emmanuel remained frozen, the old golden ring resting heavily in his palm. The following morning, after listening to Emmanuel's story, the brothers eventually agreed to take the risk. Since David was the eldest, he would wear the ring first. David gently went about his duties around the mansion. The old golden ring rested on his finger. As he walked through one of the hallways, Mrs. Orense appeared from the opposite direction. She was about to walk past him when her eye suddenly rested on the ring. Her footsteps slowed. For a brief moment, she simply stared at it. Without saying a word, she calmly walked past him and continued on her way. That night, David lay awake for a long time. The golden ring rested quietly on his finger. "David," a familiar voice called his name. He slowly opened his eyes. He was standing inside his childhood home. His mother stood a few steps away, holding a small envelope. "This money stays where it is," she said. "It's all your father left for us. It is for you and your brothers." David shook his head. "We have waited long enough." His mother looked at him sadly. Don't let greed destroy you. She turned and walked into the kitchen. David stood there, watching her disappear. After a moment, he quietly followed. His eyes settled on a small bottle resting on the shelf. His hand slowly reached for it. A few seconds later, he walked back to the table carrying 2 cups. He placed one in front of his mother. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I understand now." A faint smile appeared on her face. She picked up the cup and drank. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she began to cough. The cup slid from her hand and shattered on the floor. She looked up at David, confused, hurt, and unable to speak. David stared back at her. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I am choosing my future." His mother's body collapsed. The room fell silent. Then another voice echoed through the darkness. "I mixed the poison myself." It was Mr. Orensen's voice, repeating the same statement over and over. David Jack awoke. His chest rose and fell violently. His face was soaked with sweat. He looked at the ring. Grace's warning echoed in his mind. "No matter what you see, don't remove it before sunrise." His trembling hands reached for the ring. Then he stopped. His mother's coughing filled the room. David squeezed his eyes shut. The coughing grew louder. His breathing became heavier. With a desperate cry, he turned the ring from his finger. Everything then went blank. The following night, David quietly handed the ring to Tunde. Tunde looked at it. How was it? David hesitated for a brief moment. Then he forced a smile. It was nothing, just strange dreams. Satisfied with the answer, Tunde slipped the ring into his finger. That night, sleep came quickly. Tunde found himself seated in a circle of burning candles. An elderly man stood opposite him. Between them rested a small clay pot. The elder man looked at him with a calm smile. "So, you have finally decided." Tunde nodded. "I want wealth." The old man leaned forward. "Then the sacrifice has already been chosen." Tunde frowned. "Who?" "Your brothers." The word hung in the air. Tunde stared at the old man. "What will happen to them?" The old man answered without emotion. "They will die." Silence followed. And after that, the old man's smile widened. "You will never know poverty again." Tunde lowered his head. His breathing grew heavier. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, he slowly nodded. The flames around them suddenly burned higher. Whispers rose from every direction, whispering, "Do it," repeatedly. The voice grew louder. Tunde jerked awake. His breathing was heavy. Sweat covered his face. He stared into darkness, trying to catch his breath. Then he whispered to himself, "How? How did it know?" His eyes slowly fell on the ring. "That was exactly what I was planning before we came here." A cold shiver ran through his body. Without thinking, he turned the ring away from his finger. Everything went blank. The following night, it was finally Emmanuel's turn. Without saying much, the ring was passed into his hands. None of his brothers spoke about what they had seen. They simply watched him put it on. When Emmanuel opened his eyes, he was no longer inside the workers' room. He stood in the middle of a magnificent modern mansion. Everything around him reflected wealth. The workers' clothes were gone. He now wore an expensive black suit. Diamond ring rested on his fingers. Gold bracelets circled his wrist. A heavy gold chain hung around his neck. His hands slowly touched the jewelry. It all felt real. He cautiously walked through the mansion. Every room was more luxurious than the last. Then, at the end of a long hallway, he noticed a single wooden door. It doesn't belong there. Curiosity slowly drew him towards it. He reached for the handle. The door cracked open. There was no room behind it, only a thick forest. A cold wind rushed through the hallway. Emmanuel's heartbeat quickened. Immediately, he looked away. His face went pale. The mansion was gone. There was nothing behind him anymore, only endless forest. Fear immediately took over. His eyes dropped to the silver ring. It has to be this. Without thinking, he pulled the ring from his finger. Nothing happened. The forest remained exactly as it was. The silence became even heavier. With nowhere else to turn, Emmanuel slowly walked deeper into the forest. After what felt like forever, an ancient stone altar appeared before him. Burning candles surrounded it. Dark statues stood silently around the altar. Behind it stood a woman with enormous wings. She walked in without moving. Emmanuel froze. "What are you?" The woman calmly looked at his empty hand. A faint smile appeared on her face. "You broke the rule." Emmanuel nodded anxiously. I was afraid." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then the woman finally said, "The only thing your fear had cost you is this work. If you had trusted yourself, you would have never walked through this forest." She paused. "But fear is far more lighter burden than greed." She slowly raised her hand. The others were not led there by fear. They were led there by the darkness they carried within themselves. The eldest could not escape the guilt he buried. The second chose wealth over blood. The third was consumed by the betrayer he refused to face. They each met the end they had already chosen. Emmanuel lowered his head. Tears filled his eyes. "My brothers!" The woman gently pointed at the jewelry covering his body. "Look at yourself." Emmanuel looked down. The suit remained. The diamond ring still glittered. The gold bracelet still rested on his wrist. The heavy chain still hung around his neck. The mansion was an illusion. Everything in it was an illusion. The wealth you are wearing is not. It belongs to you. Sell it. It's worth far more than the payment you came here for. Emmanuel stood speechless. The woman looked at him one final time. Remember, greed always promises more. Then it is willing to leave behind. The forest slowly disappeared. The heavy chain still rested around his neck. The golden ring was gone. A loud clap of thunder echoed across the sky. Emmanuel slowly opened his eyes. He was standing beneath the Lagos Bridge. The rain was still falling. The same old clothes he had worn on the day he had accepted the job clung to his body. But around his neck hung a heavy gold chain. Diamond rings still rested on his fingers. Gold bracelets circled his wrist. Emmanuel slowly looked around. Then he began to walk. After a few steps, his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. A large frame photograph leaned against one of the concrete pillars beneath the bridge. Emmanuel froze. Slowly, he walked closer. His heart almost stopped. It was the same photograph he had seen inside the mansion. Only, it wasn't the Orense family anymore. It was the four brothers. The rain continued to fall. Emmanuel stood there, unable to move.